peace, what nearly everybody wants. And the leaders of nearly every country always say that that's what they're trying to achieve. Even Adolf Hitler at some point said he wants to bring peace for the people of Germany and justice for past alleged ills, etc. But that seems to be the objective of most people. They want to live in peace and security. But now then we have here President Trump, and we've talked about this earlier today, and you've seen it from Davos earlier today, where President Trump had this board of peace, and everybody's thinking, yeah, maybe this is what it's going to be successful. Maybe the UN wasn't the vehicle, but this one will be. When you start to take a look at what was said there, and you combine it with some other factors and some other information that's been revealed by other well-known people, when you look at some other factors, financial, that are starting to creep into the conversation here, and you see who's actually going to benefit from the path that's being chosen here, and all of a sudden you start to wonder, is this something that's going to lead to more peace and security for the United States and the world, or are we unwittingly setting a standard and setting the pace for what could be more conflict and more war, and maybe worse than anything we've seen, at least in my adult lifetime? And is this whole facade being built on a house of sand that can't stand up anyway, even if they wanted to say that what they're going to do is successful? I think the answer is yes to that. We're going to discuss all that in today's show here. And I think this is a lot more important than many people are recognizing. And there's a lot more at stake here than just a couple of speeches where there's a lot of fine and fancy words being stated. Let's start off, first of all, with what was said. This is President Trump kind of laying the foundation for his whole board of peace and what it rests on.
Yeah, every one of them is a friend of mine. A couple I like, a couple I don't like. No, I like, actually, at this group, I like every single one of them. Can you believe it? Usually I have about 2 or 3 that I can't stand. Usually I have 2 or 3 that I don't like. I don't find them up here. I like every one of these people. No, they're great people. They're great leaders.
So there was fewer than 20 people on the stage today. And as you may know, there's somewhere, I think the number is 196 countries in the United Nations. So a few more than 20 are out there. And one might wonder why only 20 agreed to go on the stage here when Trump's announcing this. It seems like a lot of people might say, hey, it might be a good idea to be friends with President Trump. But there were only 20 on stage. And you heard President Trump describing them there. These are friends of his. These are people that he considers friendly. So he's setting up a condition and a situation to run by people in the world and leaders of the world that he considers friendly. This is not something that's around common interest or mutual national interests or a common cause or a way of governance, etc. People who are friendly to him. The second category is not just that you have to be a friend of his, but you also have to have power.
Most powerful people in the world are in a position to have an incredible chance. I don't even call it a chance. I think it's going to happen. To end decades of suffering, stop generations of hatred and bloodshed, and forge a beautiful, everlasting, and glorious peace for that region and for the whole region of the world, because I'm calling the world a region. The world is a region. We're going to have peace in the world. And boy, would that be a great legacy for all of us. Everybody in this room is a star, or you wouldn't be here. There's a reason that you're here, and you're all stars. You're the biggest people, the most important people in the world, most powerful people in the world.
Now, as you saw us talk about earlier today, there was no one there from China, no one there from Russia, and other than Viktor Orban, no one there from Europe. So you don't have the most powerful people in the world, and that's also part of the problem here. Now, I had lunch earlier today with a diplomat of a very friendly country to the United States here in Washington, D.C. I won't tell you who this individual was or what country they're from. I don't want to put them in any awkward position. But they said something, I'm talking amongst some of their other diplomatic friends, that just made me cringe, that didn't surprise me in the least. And that's in terms of who else wasn't on the stage here. And there was quite a few people not on the stage. And they are thinking, this has every chance of going south, and they don't want to have anything to do with it, but they also don't want to anger Trump. So they're contemplating it. They're thinking about it. They're taking it to their national parliament to discuss it with the leaders of their country, and then they'll get right back to them. But they said that there's virtually no chance that they're going to do that. They don't want to have anything to do with it because they're afraid of where this is going to go and what it's based on. This is not based on the rule of law. This is not based on any kind of a moral code. That's what you have to have if you genuinely want peace. If you're actually looking for world peace, especially, you have got to have a situation where there is a recognized set of laws that everybody has buy-in and that applies to everyone. If the rule of law doesn't exist, or if it exists but it only applies to those who are not strong enough to overcome it, then you don't have any rule of law. Then you have a situation where the rule of the powerful against the powerless. As Mark Carney said in a speech in Davos the day before all this, I guess yesterday, he was saying something that he was quoting Thucydides, who says the powerful nations do as they want and the less powerful nations do as they must, because they don't have a choice in the matter. That's the rule of the jungle. The strong survive. The lion is the one who rules the jungle until the lion gets old or until another lion comes up, and then that gets eaten. And then everybody who was supporting him and who he was defending, now all of a sudden they're all at risk because there is no rule of law. There's only the rule of the jungle. When you have a situation like the rule of the jungle, and at the moment, the United States is that lion, or at least one of them, one of three at least. We're not quite as strong as we think, but we are definitely strong. There's no question about it that the United States, especially since the end of the Cold War, was the sole lion on the block. Well, now then there's some others on there. So far, we haven't been challenged. But that day is coming, folks. It's inevitable. Human history is always filled with it. When you have somebody who's dominant and preeminent, and they have the dominant power, and they start exercising it, they're going to create enemies, and they're going to create people who hate them. And they're going to be creating people who are afraid of them. And we're doing that left and right now. But in the event where you're still strong enough militarily, it doesn't matter too much how much people don't like you, because they don't have the power to do anything about it. But they're just biding their times until they do. And it's a countdown clock of duration that no one knows. But those that are the biggest supporters and the most vociferous advocates of the rule of the jungle, as long as I'm the lion, you're just setting a countdown clock for either you or your progeny, your children or grandchildren will suffer because of your arrogance. All of this is predicated upon power. So you can't even have this attitude. You can't have a lawless situation, or you can't have a situation where the rule of law, you only have it so that you can impose it on others and you violate it at your will. You can't do that unless you have a strong military power. And that is something that the United States is doing right now. Jeffrey Sachs, in a recent interview, sat down with a podcaster and talked to length about a number of things. We're going to actually get into that later on, because it has to do with AI and several other kinds of things. But one of the things he talked about here was a concerning issue of the connection between AI and military power and how that can manifest itself.
We have now a military-industrial digital complex. Silicon Valley is extremely powerful in this because the Pentagon does not have in-house capacity. So everything is being contracted out, and all the big tech companies now have this extraordinary position. They dominate their sector. They are all centibillionaires in US dollars. They control the daily discourse, whether it's on X or whether it's on Facebook. So they own the mass media. They bought the White House. They have the security state basically begging them for the technology, the contracts, the help. It's an extraordinary amount of power and an extraordinary giddiness. And they're also personally enriching the president and his family at the same time that he is enriching them.
So he is completely right in that we're going to take several things that he said there because they are really important to this conversation here. You have a lot of these AI billionaires who have an outsized influence on things. And I'm going to show you exactly why that is. The first part, one of the things she said there was that there's no in-house expertise in the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense is filled, and the Pentagon specifically, is filled with a lot of people who have come up. The vast majority of those were combat arms guys, most of them. The system is designed that way. If you're an infantryman, an artilleryman, an armor officer, some kind of combat arms guy, and you command it at the company level, at the battalion level, at the brigade level, and then possibly even at the division or somewhere around that. Then you're going to be moved up there to the positions of authority. You have to go through all those gates to get up there. So that means you have spent the vast majority of your time learning your trade about how to do infantry activities, how to defend a position, how to conduct offensive operations, defensive operations, logistics, all those kinds of things. That's where you spent your time. Now, you may have gone to advanced schooling. You may have got a master's degree in this or that. Some even have a PhD. So you have other opportunities to learn too, and you get exposed to different things. But primarily, it's about warfighting situations. So when you're talking about technology and things coming in and trying to advance tech to be able to meld that into an effective fighting force, the military guys, at least theoretically, can tell you about the fighting force and what they want the technology to do, but they themselves don't have any capacity for the technology itself. And I have firsthand experience of that. I was in the Future Combat Systems at Fort Bliss, Texas in the mid-2000s with the future, it's called the FCS, Future Combat System, where they were putting together this system of 18 systems around one system that was all combined with an integration system to where everything would work together. And it required profound amounts of technology, lots of code, and certainly a lot of interconnective both satellite and terrestrial communication systems, et cetera. All this was designed to work together. Well, nobody in uniform was an expert in any of this. So they had all these people coming in, all these contractors from Boeing and Raytheon and all kinds of other defense industrial companies that came in. So they were the experts. Now, you can tell them what you want the thing to do, but you don't have any idea at all whether this is going on or whether they say, well, we're having a problem writing all the code because it requires these millions of lines and it takes time to do. Okay. If they tell you that, you don't have any independent way of knowing it, as opposed to like if somebody came in and said, well, in order to conduct an offensive operation and to take a company defensive point, you have to do X, Y, and Z. Now, if I've been in the industry for 20 something years and been in the military, I can say, no, Q, R, and F also work. Or if you're really clever, you maybe go A, B, and C. It's not just X, Y, and Z. I know that because I've done it at firsthand knowledge. But when you have all the technology stuff, I'm just at I have no voice in the matter. I don't know. All I can say is, does it work or does it not work? That's as far as I can go. So that gives a great deal of power in the hands of the tech experts. Now, that was in the mid-2000s. That was before the advent of AI. Now that we're in that situation, you had these, multi-billionaires and their companies that are in charge of all this stuff. The knowledge gap is just off the charts. I mean, we know ChatGPT, many of people in uniform. It's about as far as we can go on our phone. We can just type stuff into it. We don't know anything about this. Well, that gives them outsized leverage. And that outsized leverage just exists as a category just because of the difference of knowledge. But as the new the current Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, has shown, he's going to hand them even more power.
Since the end of the Cold War, the defense industrial base in our country has consolidated. This makes it difficult, if not impossible, for new creators of technical innovations to win business at our department. The result is a risk-averse culture that prevents us from providing our warfighters with the best resources that America has to offer. That ends today. Simply put, the United States must win the strategic competition for 21st century technological supremacy. Artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, quantum, hypersonics, and long-range drones. If you talk to Elon Musk long enough, he will tell you how important hypersonics and long-range drones are, and he's 100% correct. Space capabilities, directed energy, and biotechnology are the new areas of global competition.
So you see that, he's setting the stage right there. And of course, by using the name Elon Musk, you're right there. You're talking about one of the biggest tech billionaires on the planet, of course, maybe the number one, actually. But there's a number of others that are in there too. And he's talking about quantum physics and advanced AI and all kinds of other things that are way outside the framework of anybody that wears the uniform, and only in these handful of people. So you concentrate all that in his hands. And now then the military is left. When he said that, that was a lot more telling, I think, than it appears. When he said, if you want to know about modern warfare, just ask Elon Musk. He'll tell you. Yeah, Elon Musk will tell you what he wants to build. and all of these other tech folks, all these other AI folks, all these other billionaires, tech billionaires, they'll tell you all kinds of gold-plated things that you need in order to make their budget bit popped, in order to make their wallet fatter, in order to make their company richer. They will definitely tell you that. See, at least if the things are working the way they're supposed to, if you have combat experience and you have a lot of experience being in the military and you understand the whole gamut of how things work from the tactical all the way up to the operational and strategic, and you understand logistics and how everything works together and diplomacy and the whole 9 yards, allies, etc. And you understand how things work. And if somebody says, hey, here's technology A, B, and C, or we'll just stick with what's one. This one piece of technology here is going to be great, a hypersonic missile of some sort. And it has these characteristics. And if I look at that and I think, okay, those are fine. I mean, you can do that. They would make the cost, $10 million per unit. But I don't really need 3 of those capabilities at all. That does nothing for me. There's other stuff that can do that, or I just don't need it at all. What I really need is these 4. I don't need these 10. I just need these 4 things here. So make me a missile that does those 4 things here. And so that means that instead of costing $10 million per unit, maybe it's going to cost $4 million per unit, $3 million, something like that, because those capabilities just don't cost as much, but that gives me what I need. How many companies do you think that will independently go, you know what, let's redo this. Let's don't make this $10 million item. Let's make this $4 million item. So we'll make a lot less money. Of course, they're never going to do that. If anything, they're going to say, you don't need these 10 capabilities. We need to toss these other 2 on top of it. You need 12. And so now it's going to be about a $15 million, but man, will it be great, because it'll solve this problem here. And especially the speed with which conflict changes. And as we've seen, the evolutions have just been phenomenal at how fast they go and how things that worked even a year ago don't. Some things that worked 6 months ago don't. You can't be putting all this money and all these capabilities in something that has these huge lead times that could be obsolete before they ever even get off the drawing board, much less off the factory line. And that's kind of where we are. Even in the United States right now, I think I showed you a month or so ago, there was a report out of the Pentagon that they're going to have 300,000 drones ready in some number of years from now. And I said, well, what good does that do? Something you're going to build that won't even come off the production line for a year or more. And when you see the pace that things are, 3 or 4 months ago, that something that worked won't now, then you're almost making sure that everything that comes off that line won't even be useful by the time it comes off, because the defensive technology and the offensive technology will have surpassed it 3 times over by that time. The industry doesn't care. The industry has no concern about that at all. They have a contract to fulfill, they have money to make, and they are only too happy to do this, and they will resist any thought of changing it to match what I just talked about, that we know for a fact is something necessary in modern warfare. The Russians live it, the Ukraine side lives it. And I can imagine that the Chinese side is probably more than anybody else is adapting to it and probably coming up with some ways based on how they take care of things and how they pay attention to events around the world and try to come up with good solutions. I would wager they're probably coming closer. I bet even they aren't getting it all the way right, but they're coming closer, I would wager. But we're not, and I can validate that we're not based on the statements that we're making. So we're setting ourselves up to spend a lot of money to potentially build the kind of force that won't even work in a conventional war, or that may have us starting off already on the back foot because we're not focused on the right things that technology wants to focus on, things that the people who put money in these and make money off of them definitely want to. That's the concern. And then we'll get back to President Trump here, because he seems oblivious to this. What I'm talking about, the military dynamic. Secretary Hegseth doesn't actually seem to be focused on the military dynamic of this, because he's still elevating, like the president, the AI rich people by name. He's elevating them. Well, Trump, of course, is focused on the same thing, because as you saw, he does business with his friends. He wants his rich friends. He wants his powerful friends. So he's putting them in these positions of power on this so-called board of peace. He's putting in the positions of power within the administration. He's putting them in positions of power within the Defense Department. And so now then he's listening to these people. And even though we had the highest budget that we've ever had for fiscal year 26, somewhere around $1 trillion. That's no longer enough. He wants to bump that up by 50% in a single year.
Much of this unprecedented success is possible because I rebuilt our military in my first term, and now we're making it even stronger. We have a budget of over $1 trillion this year, and next year we're going to $1.5 trillion. I also secured commitments from virtually all NATO allies to increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP. Everybody but Spain. I don't know what's happening with Spain. Why would they not do that? They want a free ride, I guess, huh? Every country but Spain increased to 5%. I don't know why. We're going to have to talk to Spain. With America's renewed attention to security of the Western Hemisphere, I've stopped the invasion on our southern border and designated the drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And you probably saw that we've virtually stopped almost 100% all drugs coming in by water. And now we're going to stop them on land. The land is easy.
$1.5 trillion. And everything is focused on making more military capacity, more of this, spending more on that, getting more of these. And everything is focused on, as you have seen probably in our earlier show today, talking about all the things of this so-called board of peace. It's all predicated on having a powerful military to require compulsion and compliance with directives. It's not actually aimed at reaching peace. So it's my rich friends, my powerful friends, guys who have high tech that can build me a big military that nobody can resist, and based on forcing compliance on the things that I wanted around the world, or I'll take out leaders at left and right. I'll kill people in the oceans. I'll seize their ships. I'll sell their oil. I'll steal their ships, their actual tankers, keep them. I may even seize territory that belongs to allies. Doesn't matter to me. You're going to do what I want to do. And of course, this is all predicated on power. And you see that when running into it, China is a power. Russia is a power. You can't bludgeon them. You can't just compel them and you just take over like you could against Venezuela, for example. So there are limits to that. Even President Trump recognizes that. But he is basing and predicating all of his future and all of our future, therefore, not just the United States, but in the Western world, or any of those willing to follow along willingly behind him. He's predicating it on spending a whole lot of money, making his rich friends profoundly richer. But is all of that, even if it can work for a period of time, and it is right now. I mean, what he's saying right now is true. He can compel compliance. You will either do what he says, or he will kill you, or he will seize your territory, unless you have the power to push back. But to those who don't, you're primarily talking Russia and China. That's almost it, because Europe doesn't count, because Europe can be bludgeoned and they can be compelled and bullied into anything, and nearly everybody else can too. But can that last forever? Well, I mean, just conceptually, you understand the answer to that is no. But I think that there's more and more big-time warning signs and alarm bells that should be ringing and flags that should be waving, that even that right now is built on a house of sand. Because our national debt is, I forget the exact number right now, somewhere around $38 trillion and growing like 90 miles an hour. It's probably close to $39 trillion by now if it's not already there. Because the deficit spending is $2.something trillion per year, and there's no evidence we're going to do anything to cut into that anytime soon. And you have this global marketplace where now people just don't even, in the West, and that means primarily the United States, don't even worry about it. Now then, because all these catastrophes haven't happened up to this point, and I remember in I think it was the early 2000s, the Republicans especially were just greatly alarmed that the Democrats were spending, and it had grown, the deficit had grown to like $4 trillion. And there was all these alarm bells, 4. Now we're at 39 and there's no alarm bells. No one even pays attention anymore. They just, we'll do quantitative easing, we'll print some more money, et cetera. Well, all that depends upon the preeminence of the dollar. The only reason the dollar is effective and why we can print money when we had, like in the 2008 financial crisis, and just print our way out of it, is because we had the reserve currency. And that means that we're able to call shots around the world, all around the world, even to much of the Russia and China world, at least at that time. But all of that fiat currency, and by that it means it's not based on anything real, it's just based on a belief that the power of the United States is so stable and certain that you can keep printing money because that's going to be eventually good for everybody. Everybody in the world is going to benefit from it. So no other currency has that kind of confidence, or at least it hasn't. So we've been able to say, sure, you can get away with nearly anything. But because of our actions, and not just as Trump, because this is something that predates Trump. He's just put it on rocket speed. But it already had existed. So it's already getting thinner and already getting weaker. Well, there have been a number of experts that have been saying, hey, you need to be paying a lot more attention to these warning signs, one of which is Ray Dalio.
In your mind, is this the beginning of the end for the prescience of the U.S. dollar?
It's the beginning of the end of the monetary system as we know it. It's not just the U.S. dollar, it's the fiat monetary currencies. So the UK, the euro, Japan, China all have similar debt problems and so on, and are dealing with the same interrelationships, which is the reason you're seeing gold being chosen by the central banks. They want a currency. Gold has always been the main currency, and it's the only non-fiat currency, in other words, not the currency that can't be printed, that they want. And so that's why you're seeing central banks move and sovereign wealth funds move to gold, and that's the nature of the shift of the monetary system.
Yeah, and listen, when that's one of the indicators you can see. Ray Dalio has been saying a lot of this stuff. He made some of these similar comments a year ago, and we didn't see any major movements in that. And a lot of people say, "Oh, well, he's just talking about a bunch of dangerous things that could happen," but they never do, and they never will. Many people argue that it'll never happen. We'll never have a collapse of the economy. We'll never have, another 1929 style collapse. We'll have some recessions here and there. That's inevitable. We'll weather through them. But by and large, it won't matter. All this debt, we can literally just keep putting it in forever and keep piling it up, and there is no end. They actually believe this with their actions. But now then things have started to change. When you look at the price of gold, for example, let's see, I want to say it was last July. It was trading at $3,300 an ounce. That was the price at that time, which was one of the highs. This is earlier today, $4,900 per ounce of gold, $96 per ounce for silver. It was around, I want to say, $51 or maybe $49 an ounce also in July. It has doubled. The price of gold is at an all-time high. And you see both of those charts. Why are they going up right now? There's nothing that's happened around the world that should cause anybody any specific alarms in terms of any international activities. I mean, if anything, President Trump is on paper anyway, solidified all kinds of things. I mean, he's running the show here. He's dominant, and there's nothing that should cause alarm for the world unless people around the world are starting to be more and more genuinely concerned that our economies are based on sand, and that these fiat currencies are going to start to collapse, and people are starting to believe it. And you see that they're starting to move into gold. He just mentioned there are some of the central bankers. We know for sure China and Russia have been convinced of this for a long time, have been globally buying up lots of oil. China in particular, over the last year in 2025, divested themselves of 10% of all of their dollar holdings. So they are slowly, and maybe even picking up some speed now, divesting themselves of these dollars because they don't want to be caught if there is a collapse of the dollar. And let me just tell you, folks, if the dollar collapses, if it even suffers a major slide back, even if it doesn't collapse outright, but just suffers a big jolt and drops down a level or so, you will see the devastation of the American economy. Interest rates will go through the roof because you can no longer just print money. We're already seeing even some of our allies in Europe are no longer buying dollars. They're no longer buying some of these long bonds. They're also divesting. I think it was Switzerland, may have been Switzerland. It was one of these European countries just divested themselves of $100 million in American holdings. Now, that by itself is not a lot, but it's a signal that they don't trust the dollar. And now then you see that people are starting to say, oh, snap, we better get something that's going to hold its value like gold and like silver. If these things continue to go on and we remain oblivious to this and think that we can run roughshod over the world and do whatever we want, anywhere we want, rule of law be damned, U.S. Constitution is just a piece of paper that we don't care about anymore. We'll just keep spending more and more, hundreds of billions of dollars more every year. I mean, we're going up. There was a lot of alarm over the Chinese rise in their defense industry over about a 20-year period. And there was a lot of alarm at how fast they were rising year over year, 10, 12, 15% sometimes. You're talking 50% over the country that was already bigger than the next 10 combined. And now then you're going to punch that up by $500 billion if you get your way. But folks, if that dollar starts to wobble, that $500 billion will just buy you interest. That'll just eat up the inflation that comes. That won't even get you anything new. And, then you have the ever possible risk of hyperinflation. When you already have that much debt hovering over your head, and now all of a sudden the fiat currency under which it all rests, it has been propped up, starts to wobble, we are going to be in a world of hurt. And I keep warning people about this, and I'll repeat it here. You keep having these rules that only the powerful rise and thrive, and we put everybody else under our boot. When all of a sudden those roles start to reverse, and they will, they always do. And now we could be seeing the early stages of that physically happening. Then you're going to be wanting really bad to have a rule of law. You're going to be wanting really bad for people to follow any kind of an international rules-based order. Because what you're not going to want then is somebody else who may be an ascendant lion to start calling the shots. And now we have to submit. That's the world that we live in right now. That is the world we're creating and building. You want to talk about something we're building? It's not peaceful. We're not building security. We're building a foundation built on sand and rickety old boards that could all too easily collapse. And we're doing it on the backs and of our own children and our grandchildren in the future. Although we could be in an even worse situation than I think, and it might be on our own backs. It might not even be them. It might not be that far away. But I'll tell you, the further we go down the path that we were on in Davos today, and where the Pentagon is rushing and sprinting towards to just lavish money on our rich friends, on the president's rich friends, it's just going to hasten this fall. Because even without a collapse of the dollar, just this activity alone, just in human nature, is going to eventually rebound in a negative way upon us. Nobody wants to be compelled. We didn't. We had a revolution. We put off the shackles of Great Britain in 1776, Declaration of Independence, because we were not going to have somebody else compel us and comply and coerce us to do what they wanted to their benefit at our expense. We're not the only ones. It's human nature. And so now then that we're trying to fill the role of what Great Britain did back in that day, and people are going to want to get out from underneath our boot. They're not going to want that on their neck. And I just fear the day when they're no longer obligated to do so, because the power dynamics are no longer with us at the top. It could get really ugly. And revenge is an ugly thing. And we kind of like to do it on our terms. But man, I promise you, we won't like it when it's done to us. And all of a sudden we don't have the leverage or the power to push back. And if we don't like that, if we don't even like that concept in the future, now is the time to do something about it. What we should be doing is seeking genuine peace. What we should be doing is seeking to rebuild and restore and maybe even expand the rule of law, a law that everyone follows, to include us, maybe primarily include us. Lead by example. Here is a set of moral codes that we want to live by, that we think is good for everybody, that we think others should follow, and that we will follow ourselves to the benefit of other people as well. Win-win. We're looking for ways to help raise people up, or we should, rather. That's how you can secure future when the tide turns and the tables turn, and they will, and under any circumstances, they will. And if you want to have a chance to have a nice, slow ease into that new world that can be non-catastrophic for us, this is the way to do it. I don't see a lot of evidence. I don't see any evidence that the president of the United States is even aware of these, much less would have any indication to do it. You hear me say it a lot, and I'll repeat it again here also on this. And that is that I think President Trump is in cognitive decline. And unfortunately, people who probably in a position to know, instead of acknowledging it and to doing something to mitigate the problems, instead they're reinforcing it and saying it's good and it makes sense and just do more of it. I personally believe that a lot of these people who are aware of it and pushing these kinds of things are aware of it. And they're like going, okay, well, eventually when he just can't even do, can't even stand up in front of a camera without it being obvious, then he'll go away. And then, okay, then we'll come back to something, in a normal case, so to speak, something where we have to come close to actually obeying the rule of law. But right now, Trump can get away with nearly everything, whereas whoever might follow him, and that of course would be J.D. Vance right now, he won't be able to do those things like others wouldn't too. So they're not trying to push it as far as they can now, knowing that has an expiration date itself. Time will tell on that. That's just a speculation that I have. I don't have any physical evidence. I'm just looking at the evidence we can see and coming up with some. It would be reasonable if this is the case, because otherwise it's hard for me to understand why so many people would be promoting so many things and lauding as something good that self-evidently is not, unless somehow they had some their own personal motivation. We'll see how it's going to work out. But it's important that you understand that this is not going to work long term. And that term may be shorter than any of us dare realize. We'll find out. We'll stay on top of this, though, because that's what we do here at the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We are unintimidated and uncompromised, and we'll always bring you the truth, no matter what it is, so that you can make sense of the world around you. Thanks, folks, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.